Shalom, I'm Rosalie.
And I'm Mitch. And today we're going to be talking about Christians and Jews being sacrificed over the price of a barrel of oil. Stay tuned and learn how we could avoid such a catastrophe.
For nearly 2,000 years, Jews and Christians have been divided. But now, God is calling for the healing of past hurts and the comforting of His people. Discover how God is prophetically uniting Jews and Christians across the world today on The Crossover. Here is your host, Mitch Jerome.
Welcome to our show, The Crossover. And today we have a very special guest, Avi Lipkin, who's been on our show before. And Avi is a lecturer, Avi is an author, a journalist. He's also is in the midst right now of creating a political party in Israel, Bloc Party, he'll share with us. But we're going to start off with his book here that Avi wrote back in 1999, Christians, Revival for Israel's Survival. Christian Revival for Israel's Survival. And Avi, welcome back.
Great to be with you again.
Just for our viewers that don't know you, Avi, take us back to what is a nice Jewish man like you coming over from Israel and getting into many churches to speak and engage them. What is behind that?
Well, I am married to a woman from the Middle East, from Egypt, and she's Jewish, and she understands Arabic, and she understands that there are 1.3 billion people called Muslims who do not like the Jews, who do not like the Christians. And they say that we have to kill the Jews on Saturday because the Jews are the Saturday people, and we have to kill the Christians on Sunday because the Christians are the Sunday people. This is a very well-known adage in the Islamic world. The Muslim world is 1.3 billion people. The Jews in Israel are 5 million. And so I go to the Christian churches in order to mobilize support for the state of Israel, for the Jewish people. And I also try to make it very clear to the Christians all over the world that they are threatened to the same extent as the Jews and Israel are threatened. And I also say basically that Jews and Christians are waiting for the Messiah, who is a Jew from Israel who speaks Hebrew. And that Messiah is going to come to Jerusalem. And so Christians share this faith with the Jews. Salvation is of the Jews, it says in Romans.
Yes, it does.
And if the Messiah is coming to Jerusalem, the Christians have a right and Christians have an obligation to defend Jerusalem, to stand with Jerusalem, to stand with Israel, to stand with the Jews. And so my message basically is the defense of Western civilization from Islam and an alliance of the Jews and the Christians.
So your wife stirred you on, I guess, the geopolitical scene here, the population, etc. But what event, if there was one, that, you know, you leave your family for how many months at a time?
8 months of the year.
Wow, okay. And to come here to America, traveled the continent, Canada, etc. So what event is it that stirred you to become an activist?
Well, the country that we live in, Israel, is a country which was born out of a Holocaust. Mm-hmm. We lost 6 million people, a third of our people in World War II, and we had no allies. We had no allies. I think the Christians, the Bible-believing Christians of America, were basically unaware, really, of what was going on in Europe. And the Jewish people in America were very busy with their lives here in America. And so 6 million Jews died because we had no allies. The testimony which changed my life forever is the testimony from Dallas in April of 1991, where I was told very clearly by the Council on Foreign Relations in Dallas that Israel would be sold out for a barrel of oil, that there would be another Holocaust.
Now, how did you get invited to that event anyway?
You know, God has such a sense of humor. The Council on Foreign Relations is a very high-polished, yes, high-powered CFR. Organization, CFR. And there was a Jewish lady in Dallas, a PR woman, who arranged it for me. And she made many calls to get me in. And the sense of humor of God was basically that Boris Yeltsin, the leader of Russia, was supposed to give 4 lectures to the Council on Foreign Relations in Dallas. He gave 2 lectures. The third lecture was a no-show because he got drunk. And he was so drunk that they had to put him on a plane and send him back to Russia. Okay. Meanwhile, the CFR had committed to a 4th night at the Stauffer Hotel in Dallas, a very 5-star hotel, and they had no speaker. So firstly, God had to get Boris Yeltsin so drunk so that the door would open for me. And secondly, they were under the impression that I was another Lipkin. They thought I was General Amnon Lipkin Shachak, who was chief of staff of the Israeli army. They thought they were getting a general.
Okay.
And so when I arrived in Dallas, they said to me, so what is it like to be a general in the Israeli army? I said, general? I'm Lieutenant Avi of the Army Spokesman's Office.
Okay.
And I'm going to give you guys a lecture tonight.
So you had the floor anyways.
But what they said to me after all of my lecture, that Israel must not withdraw from the Jordan River. Israel must not come down from the Golan Heights. And what I said then was that Israel should not withdraw from Gaza, which we unfortunately did, big mistake. But the point is that Israel, according to the UN resolutions, 242 and 338, must have defensible borders, meaning we do not go back to the borders of June the 5th, 67, right, which is what the State Department and the world is trying to force Israel to do.
Which means to give up the Golan and...
Golan and Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem. And
Which our people have to know that these are strategic points, that the height of the Golan and what's the width of Israel anyway? 9
miles.
Okay, and to give up Judea, Samaria.
How big is Houston? How big is Dallas?
Yeah, a little bit more than 9 miles.
For Texans, I always use the example of New Braunfels and San Antonio, because if you go, for example, from the Air Force Base, what's the name of the Air Force Base near San Antonio, the big one, on the way to New Braunfels?
Yes.
So it's 20 minutes to New Braunfels, and it's 30 minutes to San Antonio, Randolph's Air Force Base.
Yeah, that's right.
And basically, that's the width of Israel, because from the Mediterranean Sea, you drive to Jerusalem in 30 minutes, and from Jerusalem, you reach the Jordanian border and the Jordan River and the Dead Sea in 20 minutes. So for Texans, usually who know San Antonio, John Hagee, of course, would know knows the dimensions. If, God forbid, a Palestinian state is created, and if, God forbid, the westernmost border of the Judea-Samaria is Kalkilia and Tulkarem, then they are only 9 miles from the Mediterranean Sea. And if we hand over control of the Jordan River, which of course the Palestinians will demand, then there's nothing to stop a 10 million man Islamic march to the sea. So. But anyway, the point was, and this is the bottom line, that the Council on Foreign Relations people said to me 2 things. Firstly, Israel will be surrendered to the Muslims, and America doesn't care about UN resolutions 242 and 338 calling for new borders, which are secured, recognized, and defensible. And secondly, and this is the key to my message, that's why I wrote Christian Revival for Israel's Survival. They said to me that there's only one thing that made America great, and that's the barrel of oil, the steady price of oil, the steady supply of oil. And a very dear Christian friend and ally that night got up and said, you call yourselves Christians? You say that what made America great was the barrel of oil, steady price of oil, steady supply of oil? You should be ashamed of yourselves. What made America great is not the barrel of oil. What made America great was Jesus Christ. And as a Jew from Israel, at first, I didn't like Jesus Christ very much. But after Eric Gustafson said it the way he said it, I understood that there is a line in the sand. And either you are a Christian and you support Israel, or you are an anti-Christian and you support the Arabs because you work for mammon. You serve mammon. Yes. You serve oil. You don't serve the Lord. And of course, Christians who watch this show know you cannot serve the Lord and serve mammon. You have to choose.
So there's a big line there. So Avi, when you carry this message around, Christian Revival for Israel's Survival, and you're speaking to Israeli Jews, American Jews, do they receive it the same way? Is it a different message?
Well, I have to tell you something. I moved to Israel when I was 19 years old, and that was 40 years ago, because it had been inculcated in me in Hebrew school that Christians hate us. And I'd never left New York City. And by the way, I'd never in my life been called anything anti-Semitic.
So you were taught this in where?
In Hebrew school.
Hebrew school.
Well, the Germans, the Austrians, the Swiss, Germanic nations were enemies. Okay. The Russians, the Polish, the Ukrainians were enemies. The Catholics were enemies. And of course, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants of America who never killed one Jew, rest assured they would kill us one day. That's what I was taught in Hebrew school. Okay. So by 15, I was thoroughly paranoid, and by 19, I moved to Israel. And then I met my wife, and my wife said to me, why did you leave America? Are you crazy? And I said, because the Goyim, the Gentiles, hate us. And she said, the Goyim, the Gentiles, and who are they? I said, the Christians. She says, no, you don't know anything, she said to me. Christians are not Gentiles. Christians cannot be Gentiles. The Muslims, they are the Gentiles. Gentile means pagan. If you, as Christians, have the same God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that the Jews have, and that's confirmed 7 times in the New Testament, if Christians believe in the Old Testament like the Jews do, and if the Messiah is a Jew from Israel who speaks Hebrew, then are Christians pagans?
Can't be.
Christians are family, like the Olive Garden.
I think they're rooted in.
Yeah. So I was being joking about the Olive Garden, but the point is that the Jews and the Christians are one people. When I go back to the synagogue where I was raised in New York, and I've been going to that synagogue for over 50 years, and I say to them, they say, so where are you going this time? I say, well, I'm going to Texas. And they say, why are you going to Texas? They hate us in Texas. And I said, what do you mean they hate us? Yeah, Texas is anti-Semitic. And I said to them, have you ever been in Texas? No. Well, if you've never been in Texas, how do you know they're anti-Semitic? Well, everybody knows they hate us in Texas. And by the way, I go to Coeur d'Alene for Chuck Missler's Koinonia House conferences. And everybody said, oh, the neo-Nazis are in Coeur d'Alene. Aren't you afraid to go there? I said, I've been in Coeur d'Alene for 10 years now. And I've been looking for neo-Nazis with a camera, with a flashlight. I can't find them anywhere. So Jewish people in New York many times have a misconception. And I say to the Jews, I say, you need to go to church. So they say, what? Are you saying to us to go to church? He's a Jew for Jesus. I said, I'm not a Jew for Jesus, but if you go to the Christian churches in Texas or in any state, you'll find churches that have nothing but love for the Jews. And they say to me, we don't go to synagogue on Saturday. Why should we go to the church on Sunday? And then I say to them, you should read the New Testament. They said, why should we read the New Testament if we don't read the Old Testament?
And?
So the point is, Jewish people are on a different page. And I want to say something, and I hope my
But you're able to cross both lines.
And I have to cross both lines. But the point that I'm saying is, the struggle with Islam is a three-dimensional struggle. One must be acquainted with the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Quran. The work that I'm doing requires me to know the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Quran. Christians know the New Testament and the Old Testament, but most Christians do not know anything about Islam, about the Quran and the Hadith. Jewish people do not know the Quran, they don't know the New Testament, and many Jews, unfortunately, don't know the Old Testament either. And so Jewish people are basically desensitized to the struggle that the world is facing now with Islam.
Let's come back in a minute on that point here, Avi. Let's just take a break. We're going to come back in just a minute, let Avi finish up. And just want to introduce you to a British author and political activist fighting anti-Israel, the lies and the propaganda in England. And stay tuned and enjoy.
Over the centuries, Jews and Christians have been persecuted, tortured, and martyred. Never again. God has a plan to establish solidarity in these prophetic times. We must never forget.
Off the top of my head, I would say one was the claim that there was a massacre committed by Israeli troops in a village called Tantura in 1948. This claim was exposed as fraudulent. It was admitted to be fraudulent by the Israeli left-wing graduate students who concocted this claim. It is still being promoted by the anti-Zionist movement all over the world. So that's number one. Number two, I would say, is that the claim that Israel somehow supported Hamas at one point during the 1980s as a way of counterbalancing the PLO, which is impossible because Hamas didn't even exist until the late 1980s. Just impossible. That would be number two. Number three would be the claim that most of the victims of the Lebanese people who died during last year's conflict in Lebanon, it's claimed that the vast majority were civilians. Well, we know that's not true because estimates have appeared from Arab sources in the Arab media documenting that at least 600, 700 of the 1,000 Lebanese who died were Hezbollah terrorists. So it just can't be, but we will be hearing forever that most of the victims, Lebanese casualties in that war were civilians. Also on the same theme, this would be number four, in 1982 war, it was claimed that Israel killed 20,000 Lebanese, most of whom were civilians. This claim originated with statistics that were issued at the time by the Lebanese police, which were themselves based on propaganda figures issued by the PLO. The truth is that a couple of years after the 1982 war, the Lebanese government officially repudiated the claim that 20,000 people had died. They listed the total number of Lebanese casualties in that war as 1,000, not 20,000 civilians murdered by Israel in 1982. But you see this claim in all anti-Zionist and all anti-Israel propaganda.
Welcome back to The Crossover. We've got Avi here in one of his books of many that he's written. And Avi, you were just sharing with us about Quran, Old Testament, the New Testament. Where are you going with that?
Okay, well, before the break, we were talking about how basically the problem of Islam, the threat of Islam to Israel, to the United States, to the world, is a three-dimensional problem, and that you have to know the Old Testament, you have to know the New Testament, and you have to know the Quran and the Hadith. When I come to the Christian churches, the Christians know the Old Testament and New Testament, but the Christians know not about the Quran, and I explain this to them and the Hadith. Jewish people know neither the New Testament, neither the Quran, neither the Old Testament.
Okay.
Now, add to that, there's another problem. The Jewish people in America have been so blessed by the United States, so blessed by the American people, that because the professions were opened up to the Jews, all the professions, unlike in Europe. In Europe, you had all different types of castes and systems and ghettos and guilds, and Jews were not allowed to participate freely in the life of the society. So the American Jews today have placed the career in front of everything.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, Jewish people today get married much later in life than their neighbors, the Christian neighbors, because Jewish people have to send their kids to schools, second degree, doctoral thesis, doctors, lawyers, and what happens many times is that the biological clock ticks. And so Jewish people get married very late, usually not to a Jewish spouse, because once you get married, you're going to marry somebody in your profession or in your office or in your clinic. And so Jewish people have very few children because of the lateness of the marriage. Usually the children are intermarried with the Christians. Right. Another problem also is that Jewish people adopting the liberal agenda have come out basically against the Christians when it comes to abortion and homosexuality and the conservative political agenda. Right. So to make a long story short, I think God is saying to those Jews who do support homosexuality or the abortion or the career, all three things, the career, homosexuality, and abortion, are three depopulating systems. In other words, the Jewish people are the most rapidly dwindling ethnic group in America today. They're assimilating and disappearing. Not only assimilating, they're disappearing because Jewish people do not reproduce because of the career or abortion or homosexuality. So whereas there were 6 million Jews in America at the end of World War II, today there are only 5 million Jews in America. And you have to add to that the millions of Jews who came here after World War II from Israel and from Russia and Argentina, other countries. There should have been 10, 11, 12 million Jews in America. Today there are only 5 million because the Jews have opted to disappear. So
Do you mean not call themselves Jewish anymore?
No, they call themselves Jewish, but the point is a population to survive has to reproduce more than 2.2 per family. Okay. You follow what I'm saying?
Sure.
And so many people are not marrying, many people are marrying but not having children, and then if they have children, they have 1 or 2 children, and then they marry Christians. And so basically the Jewish people will no longer exist in the United States within a generation or two. That's why I go to the Christians. Because the Christians, like I said before, they know the Old Testament, they know the New Testament, and with a little preparation and training on Islam, they understand the nature of the beast.
Yes.
And then the Christians can be and must be called upon to stand for Israel, stand with Israel. That's why it's called Christian Revival for Israel's Survival. And of course, if the Jewish communities invite me to speak, I'm more than pleased to, because the Jews are my brothers. But the Christians are also my brothers and sisters.
So the Christians receive you well. I know that.
Yes.
And so, again, how is Israel receiving that message? Do they see the brotherhood of these Christians that obviously were labeled wrong from the Holocaust? We know those were not true Christians. Is there a turnaround in Israel towards the American, to the Christian, the world Christian?
This is a very important question, very essential, and I'm going to try to answer it. The population of Israel, the Jewish population of Israel, is fairly evenly divided between 2 geographical areas. Half of the Jews of Israel come from Islamic countries, including people like my wife. The Jews who came from Islamic countries know nothing about born-again Christians or evangelicals or even the Western Messianic groups. The Jews on the European side who live in Israel came from Russia, Ukraine, Poland, Romania, where the persecution of the Catholic Church and the Russian Orthodox Church was so great that there is indeed a hostility towards Christians, especially those who are Holocaust survivors. And again, the commonality of these two Jewish populations in Israel is that neither of them have any exposure to the Protestant churches in America. And by the way, when I say Protestant churches in America, I know today of many Catholic churches that are preaching the love of Israel, thanks to the Protestant vanguard. The Catholic Church has made very long strides now in the United States. And even I think it was Pope John the 23rd, was the one who 40 years ago adopted the Nostra Aetate, which basically delivered the Jews from the claim that they killed Christ. So the Protestants dropped that nonsense a long time ago, but the Catholics only dropped it 40 years ago. Yes. So the Catholic Church is now growing, I would say, into a more pro-Israel position. It's still ambivalent because of its political power in the Vatican. And I'm trying to reach out to the Vatican, to the Pope, to meet with him, because the political party that I'm forming in Israel will be a political party including Catholics too. We'll talk about that in a minute. But what I'm trying to answer your question about the idea in Israel of whether or not the Jews of Israel should love the Christians. So you have basically three different groups. You have the Russian Orthodox, you have the Catholic, and then you've got the Western Protestants that Israelis don't have a clue who they are. Okay. Now, in that sense, there are organizations in Israel which I support, like Christian Friends of Israel, Ray and Sharon Sanders, the Christian Embassy, Bridges for Peace, Jan Willem van der Hoven's International Christian Zionist Center, Tom Hess, International House of Prayer. There are many, many different Christian groups, and there are many I haven't mentioned.
So these are all in Israel.
These are Western, Protestant, evangelical, born-again organizations that I love. I work with them. And
so Israel is seeing the hand of the Christian in Israel.
Now what's happening in Israel? There are people, certain rabbis, I don't want to say the rabbinate, there are certain rabbis, and there are certain socialist, communist, elitist people who control the Israeli government who are now forming an alliance, Orthodox rabbis and communist socialists, forming an alliance against the Christians from the West for two reasons. Of course, the socialists don't like the Christians. The Israeli government doesn't like the Christians because the Christians are saying, don't give the land.
Right. Okay.
And so the socialist communists say, who do the Christians think they are to tell us not to commit suicide? Okay. You can obviously tell what my political view is about dividing the land.
Yes.
And of course, the rabbis who are against the Christians are against the Christians for religious reasons. That 2,000 year bad history, bad blood between Jews and Christians. Now, my approach is, Israel of 5 million people, this is getting back to the very beginning of your interview with me, 5 million Jews are not going to cut against 1.3 billion Muslims whose religion tells them to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. Okay. If we have 100 or 200 million born-agains on our side, maybe we can do it. But we cannot expect the born-agains to stand with Israel if in Israel we have socialist communists in the government and we have rabbis who hate the Christians and are basically shooting us in the foot. Okay. In other words, we may be right to hate the Christians, we may be right, but we may be dead right.
When God made the earth, he chose one small portion of land where his plan for the world would unfold, the land of Israel. This is the Promised Land.
You wrote a very powerful book which aligns with exactly that, and it's bridging the gaps between Jews and Christians, and it's called Israel, the Blessing and the Curse, or the Curse, pardon me. And Bill, what inspired you to first of all write this?
We were seeing some remarkable things happening in Israel, and I didn't have a handle on it at the time, but I was introduced to a fellow named John McTernan who'd been watching things since 1991. And what I mean by watching things is every time the United States politically applied pressure, an American president applied pressure in Israel, catastrophic things happened in the United States. We're talking about some of the largest, most significant events in U.S. recorded history. For example, October 30th, 1991, President Bush's father started the Madrid Land for Peace Conference. Basically, Israel, you give up the land that you obtained in the '67 war, and Israel will be guaranteed peace and security. At the time President Bush was giving this address in Madrid, Spain, the perfect storm, which had developed in the Northeast Atlantic, out of nowhere, rather than going from west to east, went east to west and slammed into the New England coast at the time of President Bush's speech, sending 35-foot waves into President Bush's home. This was an enormous storm, made movies and books and things like that about the event. Next year, when they moved Madrid to the United States, the day it convened in Washington, D.C., the largest storm in U.S. history, Hurricane Andrew, pummeled Louisiana and especially Florida. And when Israel's property is at risk, the United States' property is at risk. When the United States presidents are applying pressure on Israel to give up the covenant land, when I say covenant land, the land that God gave to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their descendants, when that land's toyed with, the U.S. property is under attack. It's incredible. It's so responsive.
It is time for us with a vision of hope to come alongside and give strength to bring forth the birthing of an establishment of God's promise in the state of Israel. But there will come a day when there may be wars and rumors of wars and pestilence and earthquakes. There may be challenges, and it seems desperate. But it says that in the midst of that, there shall be a budding forth of the fig tree. The budding forth is meaning the beginnings of. And we know that in 1917, the budding forth of the Balfour Declaration declared that the children of Israel should gather from the four corners of the world back to the land of Palestine, the land that had been promised to the people of Israel. And as the church in the United States and others began to stand with Israel, God continued to bless. But then there was a maturing process. And finally, the official state of Israel in 1948 became established and recognized by the nations of the world through the United Nations. And the nations that stood with Israel saw the establishment of a prophetic promise come to pass again. But we must continue to stand, because God's word will not come back void. It shall go forth until it is accomplished. It's time now to bring Israel into a place of security and support and hope again. And it's the Church of America that needs to rise up and speak for our brothers and sisters and support in action, not just in words.
We hope you enjoyed our show with Avi, and you can see the importance of the Christians and the Jews being united in these days.
Yes, and for those of you who want more information on Avi's website, which is at the bottom of the screen, he has 5 Deceptions of Islam and a Lesson in History, which are free downloadable audio files. Thank you for staying tuned to The Crossover, and shalom.
Shalom.
Join Mitch and Rosalie as they reach an ever-growing worldwide audience through The Crossover. We invite you to become a Crossover partner right now by calling the number on your screen. For your monthly gift of $30 or more, you will receive the Crossover Partnership Pack, which includes a DVD of today's program, a personal greeting and prayer message from Mitch and Rosalie, more information about the Crossover Project. As you continue to support the Crossover each month, you will receive a new Crossover DVD, a monthly ministry report, and your name will be added to the Healing Room. Call now or log on to our website and join the growing family of Crossover partners.